Welcome to Florence, everyone. We made our way from Bologna to Florence this morning on a fast train, and we headed straight for the Galleria dell'Accademia, of course, to see the David statue from Michelangelo. It was so cool to see in real life. It was massive. It was way bigger than I thought it was. I feel like pictures and videos are so deceiving to what it is in the real life. I was completely blown away by like the veins and everything on the statue. Like, how was that even real? The entire gallery was so cool, so interesting to see. After that, we headed to El Antico Vinile, which is the famous sandwich shop. It is a massive tourist spot, and it was a little bit crowded, a little bit hectic, but it was a yummy sandwich overall, but not the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. We spent the rest of the time walking around the streets in Florence, just seeing what's around our Airbnb, and then, of course, we headed off to see the famous Duomo in the square, and wow, by far, this was probably the nicest cathedral I had seen on the outside. There are recommendations not really to go inside because the inside isn't as great as the outside, so just keep that in mind when you're planning, but the outside was absolutely beautiful. There's an awesome gelato spot just next to it called Eduardo that was recommended to us, and it was the perfect gelato, a perfect afternoon, and then we headed out for dinner. We also had a really amazing busker just outside our Airbnb, and he was incredible. The next day we headed off to a breakfast spot. I was craving just a general breakfast, not just a cappuccino and a croissant. It was at Le Meningere, and it was delicious. It was a little bit pricier for breakfast, but we were happy to spend it because, yeah, as I said, we were craving like eggs and avocado and also like a cappuccino, mocha. That's sort of where I was at. We kept walking around and we ended up at the Medici Museum, which actually was one of the coolest things that I loved seeing in Florence. I definitely recommend going here. It was very interesting, like actually the history behind the Medici family, and just like, I can't believe that this was someone's like house. Like, people lived in this, and it was just mind-blowing. This room in particular was insane. Like, how did someone paint that on the ceiling? Like, the more and more you look at it, the more detail, like, no one has the patience for that these days, but it was absolutely incredible. We made our way to the Ponte Vecchio, of course, to see the famous history behind it. What an incredible thing to see and just appreciate. We had amazing views on the Ponte Vecchio of the other bridges, and then we headed off to the Boboli Gardens. This is something that we just sort of stumbled across and weren't really planning on, but if you are planning to do this, I recommend wearing very good walking shoes and comfortable clothing, because it's a massive walk to get up and down the stairs, up and down the little corridors. It's humongous, and again, I was just blown away that this is someone's, like, back in the day, this was someone's gardens. Like, goals. We had so many viewpoints from the gardens. We just spent the time walking around as slowly, because obviously it was a lot of work, but we just appreciated it and took in all of the views as well. I had a little stumble, and I wish John got it on camera, but he just got the very end of it. It was hilarious on the little little cobblestones, which is so funny. We then walked our way to the famous photo booth that was on TikTok, got our photos, and headed back to our Airbnb. So our Airbnb was right next to the Santa Maria Novella Cathedral, which was a perfect location. So I'll link that Airbnb below for you guys. We then went to the train station because finally my sister is joining us on the rest of our Italy trip. I'm so excited that she's now here. We went out for dinner that night, had the Florentine steak, of course, because we were in Florence, and we had a little cute lemon dinner. This one was called Toscana Agricola, and it was delicious. I had the cacio e pepe, and it was A+. The next day was one of my favorite days, just because we saw so many different cities, but we booked a tour and we went to 3 different spots. So first one was Siena, second San Gimignano, and the third was Pisa. I loved Siena. It was such a nice little town, and I'd probably stay there if I went back because it was really cute. I loved all the history behind it. We had a guided tour across that who told us the history, and then we went to the famous Siena Cathedral, and this one on the inside, mind blowing. I keep saying it over and over, but it was just like, I just can't believe that this was like, handmade, and it took years and years and years, and it's just incredible to see all the like fine work that went into it. So enjoy these little captured moments that I took. We were back on the bus and we were headed now to the Chianti Winery. So we had a little lunch planned at the Chianti Wines, which was so exciting because my sister really wanted to check out the winery, and the views were amazing. It was like truly in a movie, and I really felt like we were in Tuscany. Like we were, but it just was one of those moments and you're like, oh my God, this is what I've been seeing in my dreams, basically. We sat down with all the rest of the people that were on the tour with us, and we had a nice long lunch. We had some pastas, some antipasti, wine, of course, which I couldn't really get around, but I could appreciate where we were and how much time and effort it would have gone into making those wines. I spent the time walking around the little farm, having a little look around before we headed back onto the bus, and this time we were headed to San Gimignano, which I loved as well. It was a very small town, and this was the best gelato we had on the entire trip. So if you're looking for the best gelato, head to San Gimignano to Gelateria Dondoli, and that is the one that you want to try. We then headed off to Pisa. We had a couple hours in Pisa. It was a nice area. I was unsure about it, hearing about Pisa, but we enjoyed our time there for the time that we were there, got our pictures and headed back home to Florence. The next day we went off to the Mercato Centrale, which is like a food market there. It was like upstairs a lot of restaurants, and downstairs was all the food and vegetables that people could buy. There was like fish, all sorts. So if you're looking to pick up your own little things, I definitely recommend the Mercato Centrale. We then walked to the famous wine window, got some wine for my sister, and it was just really cool. Again, history. Everything is so historical in Italy. We then went to the Piazzale Michelangelo, which was on the other side of Florence, so where we were from, but the views make it 100% worth it, and we spent the whole afternoon there just really taking it in.
Have a drink.
We went to the restaurant that was there as well. So there's like literally one restaurant, you won't miss it. We just had some antipasti because I think for dinner we had to book, but they let us in to have a quick snack and drink. And then we waited for the sunset. Unfortunately, the clouds weren't having the best day, so it covered a little bit, but we still got a little bit of sun, but then we just went back home. The next day we headed off to Lucca, which again I absolutely loved, and we had an Airbnb experience booked, which was another cooking class, and this was the best food that we had our entire trip. It was delicious. Everything, all the ingredients were organic, homemade. Everyone's getting around it. It was such an intimate setting as well, so everyone was just getting to know each other, all the different like countries that everyone was from, and we were just making incredible food on an incredible farm. We were making eggplant parmigiana, we made a chicken dish, pasta, bruschetta, panna cotta, tiramisu, so you know, one's dream. One thing to keep in mind about Lucca as well is that the taxis are very limited. We actually, after the cooking class, waited an hour for a taxi to come and pick us up, but the lady was lovely and she let us walk around and taste some of her cherries that she had on her cherry trees, which was great. We eventually got picked up and it was time to go on Vespers. We had a accident on the Vespa. We ended up hitting a curb and fully carking it onto the road. It was fine. Like, I'm glad that this was the only incident. I'd rather just a quick couple of scratches than a hospital trip. It did ended up costing us €300 in damages, which wasn't ideal, but again, I would rather that any day over being in hospital. So that was our time, and it was very traumatizing in the moment, but it's just a funny experience to look back on. And this curb here was literally where it happened. Hit the curb, knocked over, cried, but it was all good. Stay tuned for my next stop, which is Sorrento.